and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to our show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're broadcasting live from a mountaintop in Maine. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And we have the one and only Alejandro Rojas coming on to spend the entire night, the 2 hours with us in just a minute. I want to thank you all for listening to the show, and I also want to thank the people that support the show. And if you can't support the show and you still would like to hear the entire show, you can listen live here every Wednesday at podcastufo.com, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can also go over to PSN Radio. We're live there as well. And that's PSN- I think it's radio.com. I should know that. And there's a Skype chat room over there. There's a chat room on Podcast UFO, and you're welcome to jump in there and pose us some questions this evening. And don't forget, we also run the show as a full show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday from 10 to midnight, and that's also Eastern Standard Time. And Alejandro, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've heard so much about the show, and everybody writes about it, so it's nice to actually be on it.
Yeah. You always crack me up.
I'm pretending like
do you want to do any news tonight? We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, that's what the people expect, and we better deliver.
That's true. Yeah. So before we get into that, we're just going to this is just going to be like a conversation. So you are welcome to pose some questions. We did have some people this week send us some questions that they want us to, topics that they want us to touch on. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. If you want to call in, you can also do that later on, not for the first hour or so, and that's 603-967-4030. So what do we got going on for news this week, Alejandro?
Well, we have a big Roswell story, surprise, surprise. But maybe I'll save that for the end because we could talk about that more, take more time with that one. Sure. But some of the other stories that we've gotten lately, this one is kind of a weird one. This witness says he saw this triangle UFO in California. He was in a town called Davis. It was 1:43 a.m. on October 2nd in 2012. This is an older one, and sometimes people say, why are we going over an older one? And that's because Roger Marsh, the Director of Communications for MUFON, who writes for us, will go into the archives, looking for videos and pictures that were closed as unknowns, investigated by MUFON field investigators, and then he'll write a story and post it on Open Minds for us. So I think that's a cool service, and, I got to say, before we started doing this just a few years ago, just a couple of years ago, people who are MUFON members probably remember this. Besides the journal, that was about it. I mean, the website was very stagnant. There wasn't a lot going on there, and that's why Roger and I worked this out because I felt, hey, for one, I'll be able to post, a portion of this on the MUFON website, so at least you'll get some stories going and some content because they had nothing. They would go for months with absolutely nothing new on the website, besides if you went straight into the database. And so it's worked really well for both of us. So like in 2012, for instance, there was this stuff wasn't getting out there. So now we're able to delve into those archives and get some of this stuff out there. So a lot of people most people probably haven't seen like this video and heard about this sighting. So it's kind of interesting. It's been a bit controversial because the guy says he woke up because he heard these sounds of horns and trumpets. He looked outside and he saw what he thought was a triangular craft with these lights around it. He was able to videotape it, and you see these 3 lights and these strobing lights. And he only gets it for a few seconds. There are none of these noises are happening while he was filming. So he just thought it was really weird. He thought it was weird that other people hadn't reported it. And so this was closed as an unknown. Now, looking at the video alone, the lights are stroby, kind of like a plane. And a couple of people have said, hey, that's just a plane. So I did post a video of these strobing lights that you can attach to an airplane if you have one. And you can see how they work. And I think they do look similar. Now, some people have disagreed. So, for instance, the MUFON investigator, he disagreed. He said that the object was 500 feet above his head. That's really close, and that it looked like it was huge and triangular, and it had these sounds that came out of it. So he really feels strongly, and that the dog was visibly scared, this guy said. So the guy who investigated it feels very strongly it was not a conventional aircraft. I still kind of argue, how can you tell it's 500 feet if it's night and it's, just this thing above your head. And when you're just waking up, you're so disoriented. The sounds could have not been related to the craft at all, I think is possible. So I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think people should look at it because there's people going either way. Some people are saying that there's no way that these are strobe lights, that this is definitely, a mysterious triangular craft. So, yeah, I implore people to take a look at this one and see what they think.
Uh-huh.
Have you been able to look at it? Probably not, huh? Because we kind of sprung.
No, unfortunately, I have not seen that one. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I will check it out.
It's important for you to look at the site daily.
Yes, sir.
And
sorry about that.
Make sure. Yeah.
I'm on it.
So, yeah, that's that one. Let's see. Otherwise, we do have one from – this is kind of a cool story. I won't go into the details of it. And, again, this is not one that is new either. But this is a story written by Paul Stonehill. And this is exciting because it's about UFOs in China. So he does go over especially one scientist in particular and his thoughts about UFOs. And this is a guy who had a couple of great sightings, one of them in 1977. And so you could read about that. What's interesting is there has also been a couple times he predicted there will be some UFO sightings. And he's been accurate. One time, at least in the 80s, his prediction even made it into the news there in China. So it's a really interesting story, and he has some older stories that go back in time. If people remember, Paul Stonehill is a Russian UFO researcher. He's from Russia. He lives in the United States now. He wrote a book about Russia's UFO files, and more recently, however, he's written a book about USOs, so underwater unidentified submersible objects, USOs.
Right. And he was on your show recently. Great interview.
He was. Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. He's really interesting. So he kind of talks about how it relates these Chinese stories with and how they kind of found out about him through his research in Russian ufology. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Otherwise, another sighting. This one was in Wasilla, Alaska, and this was from another one from 2012, so another one from the archives. But this is another video of kind of like one I think we talked about last week with these two lights kind of floating through the sky. These lights kind of flew up. But it's kind of a funny video because this lady said she saw these lights and she didn't know what they were, and she got scared. She watched them until she couldn't see them anymore. She knows it was a UFO sighting, and she recorded them and posted those. But it was kind of funny because this happened on October 27th when she was loading her kids into the car to take them to a haunted house. And you can see in the video she's videotaping, and it's kind of like you get the sense that her husband's like, okay, honey, let's go. Let's go. You know, like, could you get done taping your UFO so we can go now? So it's kind of an interesting video. That one, again, was investigated and closed as an unknown.
Hey, before we move on to, I know we're going to end the news with Roswell and go into that a little bit. Yeah. But before that, I wanted to talk about China. I used to be in touch with someone over there. We kind of lost touch. He used to actually report in on what's going on in China, but we really don't get a lot of information about UFOs in China. What do you know about that?
Yeah, we don't get a lot of information. I love talking about Chinese ufology, so here we go. And I'm glad you brought this up. But you're right. I think it's the same reason we don't hear a lot except for from Stonehill from Russia. I think non-English speaking countries we just typically don't hear much from. Now, we do hear from Mexico occasionally. Of course, they're close. We have people like Jaime Maussan, bless his heart, you know, who is reporting some stuff, not the best source of information necessarily, less discriminating. So in other words, if Jaime is reporting it, still look into it and take it with a grain of salt. But we also have, of course, in South America, actual government reporting agencies. So we hear from them often. Of course, France has a organization as well. But again, I think because they're not as high profile and because there's a language barrier there, we just don't hear from them. So we just don't hear much about ufology in China. For those reasons, we've interviewed, and you can find it on YouTube, Professor Sun-Shi Lee, who is a Chinese ufologist, and he's a really interesting guy. But, of course, this is what's funny about that interview. Sun-Shi Lee speaks Chinese and Spanish. So he was interviewed by Antonio Huneeus, who used to work for Open Minds, and he speaks many languages, including Spanish. So he had to translate, this Chinese guy speaking Spanish to Antonio, who then translated that to English, which is kind of funny. So I think it's just like, the language barrier is the big issue. But China has an interesting history. One of the best books available that you're just not going to get, so I apologize. But it's written by a guy named Paul Dong in China. And here's what's interesting about China is that we've written quite a bit about this in our magazine and on the website. And I don't see this anywhere else. A lot of this is research that was done by Wendell and Antonio. But in China, they were and Sun-Shi Lee, who has written stories for us and we translated. But essentially, there were Professor Sun-Shi Lee and some of his colleagues were really into UFOs. But at the beginning of China's, socialist or communist regime, they were really tied closely with Russia. And Russia had a bad outlook on the whole UFO topic. So it was really underground, and it wasn't really done. So, for instance, the professors in China couldn't really talk about UFOs, and that was because Russia was really in control of things. In the 70s, that began to change, and the Chinese started to take control of themselves. At one point, and I believe it was Sun-Shi Lee, he went to he decided he wanted to start writing about some of these UFO stories and to create an organization, a UFO organization, amongst his colleagues, academics. his wife, I believe it was, worked for, and I'm pretty sure this is all accurate, all the details, but this is essentially how it worked. His wife worked for the government, so they actually approached the government and said, we would like permission to create a UFO journal. And they said, okay, no problem. And they even said, well, who's going to fund it? And Sushi's like, I don't know. I haven't gotten that far. The Chinese government actually offered to fund this journal. And so the journal got created, and that started this organization that burgeoned into a huge organization with a lot of members. And it's more like a professional scientific society where if you're a doctor or a professional, you can join the society as a full-fledged member. But if you're not a doctor, then you can only be kind of an associate member, and you can get the journal and stuff like that. So kind of like we were talking about with MUFON, they would put out a journal that was written on a monthly basis. But moving forward in time to this book, so when did that information start getting here? Wendell Stevens, some of you may know, he's an American in the Air Force, very controversial. He worked with Billy Myers and some other contactees, quote unquote, some of the cases that aren't that credible. Essentially what happened is Paul Dong wrote this book about UFOs in China, and these are cases that were from, the like early 1900s up until that time period in the 80s. Really great cases. He asked Wendell if Wendell would like to get that translated and print it in English. And Wendell said, well, I'd love to, but I don't speak Chinese. Paul Dong actually went to the government. The government offered to translate it, and one of the departments in the Chinese government translated his book into English, gave that text to Wendell with all of these wonderful pictures and everything, and Wendell printed that and packaged it, and it's just a book full of great, incredible Chinese cases. Luckily for you all, in our magazine, Open Minds Magazine, but also on our website, we have a lot of these stories that you'll be able to find here and there. And in fact, at least one of these stories that is in the Paul Stonehill story was also in Wendell's book. So at least one of the images, maybe a couple, come from the book that Wendell Stevens worked on. But if you can get it, there's good sites out there, Abe's books and others. Look for, UFOs over China and written by Wendell Stevens, and you'll be able to see it.
You had one more. When we chatted earlier today, I'd like to talk about what the article that you're working on, if you would.
Roswell. So some people get upset, and they're like, oh, man, why are they talking about Roswell again? I get so tired of hearing about Roswell. Do you get that? Have you heard people complain about that?
Always, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so to those people, I would say, regardless of what you may think, and you can call in and we can debate this, but there are not a lot of great cases out there with an abundance of credible witnesses. Roswell is one of those very, very, very few cases, and that's why Roswell is important. And not only that, when the general public thinks UFOs, they think Roswell. So that also makes it really important. But this also makes it really important. This story is cool. So Kevin Randle, some of you, have you had him on the show?
Oh, yes, a few times, yep.
Yeah, so he's great. He's a Roswell researcher. He's a UFO researcher and author. He's got a blog out there. And in his blog, just late last week, he wrote that one of his colleagues, someone he's been in communication with, has offered to I guess they were talking about this Ramey memo, which I'll get to, but they've offered to pay $10,000 to anyone who can decipher this memo. So let's explain this memo. So what happened, it just to give people a little refresher, is in 1947, in particular on July 8th was the day that we're looking at, this was the morning when Walter Haut, who was the communications guy at the Roswell Army Airfield, sent out the press release that said, "We found a flying saucer." And, of course, he based that off of the intelligence officer for the Roswell Army Air Force Air Base intelligence officer Jesse Marcel, who went the day before to look at this debris that people had, that Mac Brazel said was a crashed UFO. He went and looked at debris. He couldn't figure out what it was. He brought it in. Then on the 8th, he was ordered to take this material and have it shipped to Fort Worth, and for himself also to go to Fort Worth, where he would meet General Roger Ramey. So while he's in the air and while he's there, Walter Haut writes this press release, sends it out in the morning of the 8th. The AP then in the afternoon of the 8th posts a story, the Air Force or the Army Air Force, because at the time that was about the time right before the Air Force was created. So it was a department of the Army actually. Wrote the big story, and so it went everywhere that they found this flying saucer. Well, Ramey, when Jesse Marcel got to Fort Worth, they walked Jesse Marcel to Ramey's office, and in his office he had some material on the floor that later Marcel said was obviously a weather balloon. But he was told, we're going to tell the public that this is what you found. And being a good soldier, Jesse Marcel Jr., who was a friend of mine, confirmed this. As a good soldier, Jesse Marcel said, "Yes, sir." Didn't ask questions. These were his orders. He said, "We'll tell people this is what I got." So a photographer came in. They took pictures of Ramey, his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas DuBois, and Jesse Marcel with this material that was obviously a weather balloon. Then they sent out a reply that, "Oh, sorry, we screwed up. That wasn't a flying saucer. It was a weather balloon." So in these pictures, Roger Ramey is holding a piece of paper. And in most of these pictures, you can't tell what is on that piece of paper. But in one of these pictures, it looks like there's some writing on it or something. What some researchers have done, the most well-known who's done this is David Rudiak.
Right.
And in fact, in my story, I have a video of a part of a Sci-Fi Channel special where they go over Rudiak and his findings. But they've taken, good, clear photos, and they've been able to scan them and blow them up. And David Rudiak has looked at this memo, and he feels that you can see some things on this memo, such as the phrases "and the victims of the wreck," and another phrase, "in the disk they will ship." He thinks that's very important because it indicates to him that there was a disc that was found. When it says "victims of the wreck," he feels that then that corroborates the testimony from some of the witnesses who say there were, aliens that were found that were part of this crash. So he actually has ideas about what the entire memo said. In fact, I could read it if you want me to.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It says FWAAF, Fort Worth Army Airfield is what that stands for, acknowledges that a disc is the next new find west of the cordon. At location or in addition was a wreck, or perhaps he thinks it might say pod or airfoil, near operation at the ranch, and the victims of the wreck you forwarded to the team at Fort Worth, Texas. Aviators in the disc, they will ship for A8 Army Airfield. That part he's less clear about. By B-29 or C-47, Wright Air Force assesses airfoil at Roswell about that or about noon. Some of these words he has alternate possibilities. Said that this misstate meaning of story and think late today next sent out PR of water weather balloon would take if photos used in land something cruise. So, I mean, as you can tell, he's definitely not got it all figured out.
But that's a lot more than I heard before that was deciphered on this.
Mm-hmm.
So is this recently?
Well, this is his, not really. I mean, this is as of, this is what he feels that the memo most likely says. He's uncertain about all of this. He's most certain about, like, those two phrases. But, yeah, that's what he feels most likely what it says.
That's pretty amazing.
So the thing is that not everybody agrees with him. Some people have accused him of being biased, and so that has, tainted his deciphering of this letter. Kevin Randle has been a bit critical of some of the areas of the letter. In fact, and this is interesting, the Air Force themselves took a look at this picture and tried to decipher what was in the letter. So in 1994, New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff asked the Air Force to explain what's going on in Roswell. Why are people talking about this? And I should explain to people, some people probably don't realize this, but that Roswell was really unknown until the 80s. That once Ramey came out and said, oops, sorry, it was a weather balloon, the public and the press said, oh, okay, it was just a weather balloon, and it was lost to obscurity. Until there are a couple obscure references here and there to it, but that's about it. But then it was about 79, it was the late 70s when Stan Friedman heard about Jesse Marcel telling people about this, and so he interviewed Jesse Marcel, and Jesse Marcel said, yeah, that was not a weather balloon. That was an alien spacecraft. And so Stanton, along with Bill Moore, they began researching and finding other witnesses, and that culminated into Bill Moore's book about Roswell. And then Stanton wrote a book, and all kinds of books came out. And that's when it got huge. Then everybody started to know about Roswell. And so Roswell got so big that this congressman asked, what's going on here? Everybody's talking about Roswell. What is this? And so in 1994, and it was updated in 95, the Air Force wrote this long paper, something like 300 pages, about what they thought Roswell was. Really, I feel it's not that great of a investigation. They didn't talk to a lot of the important witnesses. They didn't talk to Marcel, just used some of the things he said. One of the other things that's important is Dubois, who's in the picture with Ramey.
Mm-hmm.
I've posted this video on our story, but he has said it was a cover-up. He said that weather balloon was not what was there. It was understood by all of us in that room that was a cover-up. Now, the Air Force, in their analysis, said that it was a cover-up, that Ramey and for some reason had decided to cover up what it really was and call it a weather balloon when it was in reality a Project Mogul balloon. It seems like they even question, though, whether Ramey would have even known about Project Mogul, but they say it was a Project Mogul balloon, and so Ramey didn't want the public to know about Project Mogul, so he said it was a weather balloon. Project Mogul was still a balloon. This was balloons they were launching that had listening devices on them, so they could listen for Russian detonations of nuclear bombs, so they can see if there were testing. So that's why they said the cover-up happened. But again, Jesse Marcel says that was not a balloon. I mean, I would have known what a mogul looked like. I would have known what balloons looked like. This was not a balloon, according to Jesse Marcel and other witnesses. Mm-hmm. So, and then you have this memo. So people still feel that this memo could be like the smoking gun to Roswell, that if we can figure out definitively, what's on that memo, then we can figure out what's going on with Roswell. And that's essentially, I guess, what Randall says he was talking with his friend about is, if we could fund a lab to do some real research, because, hire some professionals to figure out what's in that would be really cool. And that's when his colleague decided, well, I'll offer a $10,000 reward. So he does say that in order to get the reward, there must be overwhelming agreement that the result is definitive with the most of the text clear enough that there is little or no disagreement on what it says across a broad spectrum of people of all opinions, whether true believer or complete skeptic.
Now is this the original scan or the original negative? Is that what Rudiak is working off of?
No, I mean, but he has scans of that negative. And as far as I know, that's the best source if you go to Rudiak's website for the best versions of those images. And I'm sure on one of his blog, Kevin Randall has links to that as well. But I have a link to Rudiak's site here. Well, some people have complained, how can there be a consensus amongst people? There's never a consensus amongst
Good point.
people. So that's impossible. But Randall then argued that, well, remember the Roswell slide? That when that placard was deciphered, with the Roswell slide, of course, was when these people found this photo, they were saying it was an alien, but there's a placard in it. But that placard was quickly deciphered by some people on the internet, some great researchers, and they even showed me how to do it so I could do it myself. And we all came to the consensus that, yes, the placard said, this was a mummified body of a Native American, essentially a museum display. So he argued that, there was a consensus about what that placard said, and that the only ones who didn't agree with the deciphering of the placard were the people that had a vested interest in the photo being an alien. People like Jaime Maussan, who never gave up that it's an alien when it obviously is not. So so I think that indicates that, if Randall is involved with being able to make the judgment that as long as what he determines are sober, credible researchers who have come to a consensus, then hopefully they'll award this money. But and I trust Kevin Randall. I think Kevin Randall is one of the best researchers out there. I think he's great, very grounded, very level-headed. He's never given anyone reason, I don't think, to doubt his credibility at all. Which you can't say for every researcher out there. But so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Now, it makes me, one of the first things I think of is, who would you go to that would have the best equipment to decipher this? And the first thing I think of is the FBI or some CIA or something like that would have the best equipment for actually deciphering this. First of all, it was a boo-boo for him to be holding that in his hand, obviously. And second of all, though, if that is so that the FBI or CIA or whoever could decipher it, would they even bother? I mean, is it even an issue that they would ever think about? And another thing is... about the crash itself, and you mentioned Kevin Randall just a second ago, and last time I had him on the show, I said, I told him what the skeptics often say about Roswell, that it hadn't been heard of, for years, and it just popped up in 1980 when Stan Friedman got a hold of it, and he said, well, on the contrary, when it first happened, it was like the biggest story of July of 1947. It probably was, but it was one of those flash in the pans. As soon as the press release went out to recant it and calling it a weather balloon, it did die, like you said. Totally died until it was brought up again. And I think I heard that somewhere in Canada there was some type of publication, like in the 1960s or something about it. But other than that, it was very little talked about, which is kind of unusual, I think, in general, because it was such a major broadcast of this thing being found. I mean, when in time has it ever happened that the Air Force said they had a disc? You know, I mean, it's just kind of weird that it just went away so like it did.
You know what? And you make another great point, and why Roswell's important. I mean, never have we had the Air Force say we found a UFO except for, or a flying saucer, which at that time, you know, implied an extraterrestrial spacecraft. I mean, if you listen, and Rudiak has it on his website, but if you listen to those radio broadcasts, you know, they make a comment, something like, oh, you know, we're finally going to figure out what are these flying saucers that have been seen flying all over the country. So it was something that people were aware of, that was going on. It was a news story. And the Air Force says, yeah, they've captured one. We've never had that. So that's what makes this a big deal. And I think, you know, makes all of this a big deal. So as far as who would do it, yeah, I think you've got a great point. I think that doing it this way, you would have to have someone who's willing to go to some lab. I'm sure there are some labs that do this sort of thing. You know, data recovery type specialists that work also on you know, deciphering material like this. But someone would have to want to put the money up front with the expectation that they'll be able to get it at the end. Or a lab that does this kind of work would need to be confident enough that they'd be able to decipher it, that they would be like, hey, let's do this and make some money. So
yeah, but, you know, in a situation like that, $10,000 is nothing if you went to hire like a real specialized lab to decipher. They'd probably want a retainer of $10,000, you know, to start.
Do you think so?
Yeah, probably. You know,
I mean, I have no idea what something like this would cost. That seems high, but maybe you're right. I don't know.
No, I actually contacted a place in Illinois about. We had a conversation, and it's still not completely over yet, about the MJ-12 papers that were found in a CIA's estate. This is something I brought up a while back, and so I contacted this company, and just to do testing to see if the paper was from 1947 and the ink. They wanted a $2,500 retainer. So I can imagine if someone is going to try to decipher a letter like that, it's going to be big bucks. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe I'm totally wrong. But before we move off of the subject, I want to stay on it for a little bit. Also, just to let you know, I had an email today from a listener that randomly said, you know, he was a mailman, and he delivered mail to this guy and had conversations, an ex-NSA agent. And one day, not to elaborate any more than what he said, the mailman said that Roswell did indeed happen with aliens and everything, crash and aliens. Whether, you know, I mean, I don't know if I'll get any more information and if anything can be, if anything can be elaborated on, and if this guy is who he says he is and all that stuff. But I thought that was pretty interesting. It just happened today.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, so we'll see what happens with this. Hopefully people pick it up, and hopefully it reinvigorates kind of this search for what the letter might have said. When you were mentioning the FBI getting involved or someone going to the FBI, maybe this is their opportunity to say, you know what, we decided to take another look and, come up with a version, something like maybe make it seem like he was being yelled at, like, what kind of mess are we in? You guys have made us the victims of the wreck of this disaster of the press release. We're going to stick this disc where the sun won't shine or something like that, to kind of make it seem like it was something other than what it really may have been. But who knows? I think it's really interesting what they think they see so far.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, people talk about quite often. So
yeah, well, Roswell it has a lot of moving parts. It's one of those things that obviously is never going to die. But I wonder sometimes, what will Roswell be 100 years from now if we never actually get the evidence that, you know, something indeed really did happen, if we never get the full-on evidence, because so much of it is turned into mythology. And you go to Roswell every year. Matter of fact, you're doing a talk there. You can mention a little bit about that coming up in a few weeks. You're going to be out there. And so you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's a lot of this that just gets into pop culture and gets distorted, which makes me wonder what the Roswell future is.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is Roswell is definitely kind of it's interesting to see, for instance, when people come to, and it's kind of like how our field is in general, when people come to Roswell, they have ideas about UFOs and Roswell, even though many of them haven't read a book. Maybe they've seen movies, maybe a couple episodes of a documentary, and that's about it. But people just kind of get these ideas. It represents how they feel about the possibility or likelihood that we're being visited by ET right now. And that makes it kind of interesting. And it's interesting that, you know, some people would, you know, when they see, you know, just hear very lightly that supposedly this UFO crashed and there were aliens in it. Oh, yeah, that happened. And just right immediately they can believe it and think that it probably happened, whereas others are immediately skeptical. And others, you know, like for me, it makes me want to look more into it, really. Who says this? You know, why do people believe this? So, I mean, you get to see how belief systems work and how different people operate, which I think is really important, because really when it comes to worldviews or the elections and all of the talk that's going on right now is a great example. The direction a society moves in is based off of beliefs and concepts and ideas that don't necessarily need to be rooted in any evidence reality, but just a belief, you know. A lot of countries are governed by their religions, and that pushes them forward, or that motivates their decision making. For us, you know, there's debates about climate change. There's debates about everything. There's conspiracies about Trump and Hillary and Obama. There's conspiracies about everybody, about, you know, some ominous things they may or may not have been related to that help people decide why they do what they do. So these kind of things, these belief systems are important when it comes to you know, what's going to happen in the future. So what people think of Roswell in the future, I think, will be important as to especially what people think of this field, or, you know, how much they may divert from belief in science and or governments. I think one of the things that we've seen, and especially I feel, and others may disagree, and I don't mean this to mean that it's, you know, all the Republicans, but certainly during the Bush era and during when defense lost all that money, you know, and Rumsfeld was having to answer for these millions and billions of dollars that the defense couldn't account for. During that period of time, it seems like people began to really just be skeptical of the government and everything that they have to say. And that has not been repaired. And I think, you know, for us working in this field, just like Ramey lying about the weather balloon, we've all kind of opened our eyes and come to this realization that the government isn't necessarily going to tell the truth. Neither are companies. That there's a knee-jerk reaction to lie or to keep secrets. And so that leaves us, I think, disillusioned and sort of and skeptical. And so that can be damaging. Jacques Vallée used to talk a lot about this sort of idea. And so when you take climate change, for instance, when scientists are saying one thing, or the EPA or NASA is saying one thing, and people are deciding not to believe that in mass, it shows then how much of an influence those traditional influencers have had and how that's waning. And then so what becomes the influencers out there? Who knows? Maybe you'll have someone like Stephen Bassett running on a ET platform and using things like the MJ12 files, which I think are highly dubious and not real whatsoever, in my own opinion or research, or let's say something else, some other mythology that is created. Maybe the Roswell slides, for instance, that becomes where everybody starts believing that really was an alien. I mean, what I'm getting at is that the masses in their beliefs can wane and ebb and flow, and it doesn't necessarily have to be based off of science or anything. So who knows? Roswell could burgeon into something huge, or it could be further debunked and be something that's seen as more of a joke. But at least right now, I think the trend is for people to take this sort of stuff more seriously.
Well, I wonder also if there's any other Roswells out there. In other words, something that happened somewhere along the line and was covered up quickly, and we just haven't found out. I wonder if, it's possible that someday another Roswell will land on the UFO doorstep. That something happened and was quickly changed. I don't. Because here, I consider Roswell. I mean, most skeptics and people that really pay attention to this topic, that it's probably the most important case, at least in American history, as far as UFOs go, and it was unknown for all those years. Excuse me. What else could be unknown out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's possible. It could be something that's uncovered, via something like WikiLeaks. I mean, for example, there are UFO files in there, not a whole lot, but George Knapp, even today, posted on Facebook a WikiLeaks of a Algerian UFO sighting. That's something. WikiLeaks didn't just post that. This file was posted something like 3 years ago, but it's just something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and it's short. It doesn't say a whole lot. Some people have reported a sighting, but it's an interesting sighting. So if, a WikiLeaks file reports something that opens up a Pandora's box.
Oops. You back?
It says you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says you put me on hold.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying to take a call and I pushed the wrong button. And
upset you.
So, caller, if sorry I hung up on you, if you want to try again, I'll try to click the right button this time. So along those lines, we had a question come in by email this week that asks, what if anything, did Gary McKinnon see? Now, Gary McKinnon was a hacker that broke into, was it NSA? Do you remember who he?
We've got a story on it, and I think it's one of the best stories. He broke into, I know, a JPL. I would have to look. I can't remember all of the ones. I'll look it up. eventually, he broke into a couple places. And one of them, and these were like NASA and stuff like that. Now, these are claims, what he claims to have seen or hacked into. And one of the hard parts is, and people get mad at me for saying this, but if you look at my story, I reference Gary McKinnon's comments himself, because I essentially wanted to figure this out too. What did he actually say that he saw? Because I didn't think there was a good story out there for that. So I did a lot of research to find out from his own mouth, not just what other people were saying, what he said. And essentially he says he was drunk and stoned the entire time he was doing this, hacking in. And it wasn't like he was this major mastermind hacker. He was able to build this software that would go in and look for computers that essentially hadn't set their password and username. So it was looking for like the username, and password of password. It was looking for computers where people hadn't set their usernames. And it was at a level to where, these are computers that were accessible that weren't in the deep firewalls and stuff. So the computer systems belong to NASA, the Army, the Navy, the Department of Defense, and the Air Force. What he says he found a satellite picture of a UFO, and that this was the time period of dial-up. And that he was looking at it, but before he could download it, he was busted and they turned him off. So that should have indicated to him, hey, they know you're looking, but he kept looking anyway. Here's his exact quote too. He said, I was smoking a lot of dope at the time, not good for the intellect. The other thing that he said he saw is he broke into U.S. Space Command, and he said he saw a roster of non-terrestrial officers. And to him, that makes him believe that perhaps there's a space program out there that is going on, and that's why these guys were called non-terrestrial officers. Space Command hasn't said we do have non-terrestrial officers. Nobody's kind of said what that means, or if he even saw that. There are rumors that he saw the transfer logs of the names of ships that are like spaceships. The USSS for like United States Spaceship LeMay and the USSS Hillenkotter. And these are names of people who allegedly have been related to UFO issues. However, that is just a rumor. That is not something that Gary McKinnon said himself. So essentially, that's about it. He was inspired by Stephen Greer and the Disclosure Project, which is kind of funny because so was I. But to get into all of this, the Disclosure Project itself. But that's about it. So there's not much that he said, and he doesn't remember much, and he didn't download anything because he was drunk and stoned the whole time he was doing it. And these are his words. So you can go to the story. It's called "What Did UFO Hacker Really Find?" I've got a story on this. And I've got links to all of my references to his interviews where he's talked about what he actually saw. The sad thing is it was kind of funny because when they busted him, they came to his house and they took him away, and they offered him a really good deal that could have saved him a lot of headache. They offered him something like 6 months probation or something if he just admits to it and stuff. And he thought he would be cool. And he said, no, I don't think you're going to bust me because I've got information you don't want out there. And they were like, oh, yeah, what information? And, of course, all he had was this. And so they said no and threw the book at him. And we're going to extradite him and throw him in jail for like 20 years or something like that. He won his case where he didn't get extradited. However, they weren't afraid whatsoever of the this information that he thought they would be afraid to get out.
Wow. So that's a side of the story I've never heard.
Yeah.
And so that just goes to show that how things can get distorted.
Yeah, they're really distorted out there because now, especially about these, in some circles out there, it's like a given that the USSS LeMay and the USSS Hillenkotter are flying around out there, and they're these giant spaceships with these non-terrestrial officers and military personnel on there and everything, but no, those were rumors. I think I know where those rumors stem from, and the person who said them and made that rumor popular, I asked him, where did you hear that? And he said, I don't know, I think I heard that somewhere. And it's unfortunate because then this person goes out there and talks about it, and these people believe what this person has to say. And I won't say his name because I don't want to trash him or anything, but yeah, this person is just an older person who his memory is a bit faulty, and he goes out there and talks and shows a bunch of pictures and says they're from places where they're not. This is someone who's old enough where they never got on the internet, so they don't know that, on the internet you can find the real places these come from. But unfortunately, a lot of people take people at their words and don't do the research and believe everything that they have to say. And
now, can you say his first name like in a cough? Like
no.
This guy, no. Okay. Well,
no, I'm going to give you absolutely no hint as to who this person is.
I'm going to try to. This guy that's been trying to call us. I'm going to try to dial out. So have patience. I hope this isn't one of these things that crashes. I'm going to try to dial him. So, Phil, I'm going to try to dial you. Here we go. I'm going to try to add you. I have no idea what's going to happen when I press the send button. Could be goodbye to Alejandro. We'll see. Now, how do you do it? Nothing's happening. Well, I just did it on add, trying to add the call, and okay, I guess we're not going to be able to waste any of the time. Whoops, that didn't do anything. All right. Sorry about that, Phil. We tried. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to, let's see. He wanted to know, this is in the message board, he wanted to talk about the Frank Edwards book and the UFO thing that happened in his hometown, which is Michigan, I believe. Do you know anything about that?
No. However, the Frank Edwards book is a lot of very dubious information. So I think he's talking about, if I'm thinking about the right book, it's like one of the very first UFO books.
An early one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or no, maybe I'm not thinking of the same one. I'm not sure. No, I can't think of what that is anyway, so I apologize. Not familiar.
So there's so many different directions we can take this this show in, and we're right at the top of the hour. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different kind of groups that sort of do not collaborate. We don't really have to get into that right away. There are some questions that came in. I'm going to ask one of them here from Carrie, who sends us a lot of questions. And have any incidents or guests on, he's talking to either one of us, on your show influenced your personal beliefs or perspectives on the UFO subject? If so, how? Can you think of anyone, Alejandro? And I'm going to ponder that while you have your answer.
I would say most. Most guests, however skeptical I am of what they have to say, I'm I listen with an open mind and an open heart, and I mean, I truly respect everyone that I interview, and I would say most of them have something to say that makes me rethink things, that make me change my perspective a little bit. I think often, even some of the people you don't see eye to eye with the most, at least you have something that you agree on, or they have some piece of wisdom that makes you scratch your head or think. So, I would have to say most of the guests, I think. So, for instance, let's think about a recent guest. So I had Paul Dong on recently, or Paul Dean. I was talking about Paul Dong. That was you missed that part. That was part of the Chinese thing. But I had Paul Dean, and he was talking about, who in the government has been looking for UFOs, and where are those files going? Because we know, just because the Air Force says they don't look at UFOs and the FAA says they don't look at UFOs, they're looking at, there's no doubt they're looking at something that would be of concern. They can't be that inept that they would be completely not paying attention to things that are being reported in the sky that, could be something that could be a threat. And so, he's been following this string to find what those are. You've had him on the show. So he brought up OPREP 3, which is this channel to report important information like that. He said it's been changed and closed, but there's a route that I didn't know of. That's fascinating. Paul Stonehill, who we were talking about the Soviet UFO file, but underwater cases. I think what was really interesting with him was, he can name off, I especially find it interesting that he has spoken to so many ex-Soviet military who are really into UFOs and, believe that there is something to the topic. That is fascinating because that's something that I didn't know before. So I would say most. I'm the kind of a here and now kind of guy too. I'm always paying attention to what's going on right now out there. So that's why, the most recent things come to mind when I think of this sort of stuff. But practically every guest makes me think or changes my perspective in some way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I myself have to say that, there are a few that have stood out, but I don't feel actually like I'm any closer to knowing anything about the topic than I was to begin with, but I love hearing, the different guests' thoughts on what could possibly be happening. And I listened briefly to Paul Eno. He does a show, Paul and his son, Ben. Mm-hmm. And I listened recently to him talk on a show, and I have to get him back on my show because he has a theory of everything, which is a connection of everything, which it was late at night. I was listening, and whatever he was saying, it made me scratch my head and say, wow, I could have never thought of that. And so I promise I'm going to reach out to him and get him on the show fairly soon. And see if I can get him to talk about that on this show. But it was fascinating.
I have a theory of nothing. So nothing's related. So if you were to meet a Bigfoot and say, "Hey, Bigfoot, what do you know about UFOs and ghosts?" He would say, "Nothing. I don't even believe him. Why? What do you know?" And same if you sat down with a ghost and said, "What do you know about Bigfoot or UFOs?" He's like, "There's no such thing." So I don't think they know or are related to each other at all.
Well, okay.
I'm kidding. Actually.
No, that's good. That's good. Now I like some of the guests that have stood out. I mean, there are many. Some recent guests. I actually really liked our last week's guest, Ron Revere. Yep, he was great. Chris Mellon, I thought was pretty good. Actually, very interesting to talk to, and David Marler stands out. as someone really important to me, someone really solid. And Kevin Randle, you mentioned him. But these are all people that have these are all really intelligent people that have good insight, but it's all still guessing. I mean, guessing with the evidence that we have, really.
Yeah, Marler will be in Roswell. I'll be there speaking, like you mentioned. I'll be speaking for the Roswell Daily Record, which was a newspaper that, the famous newspaper cover you see from the Roswell Daily Record about the UFO. I'll be speaking for that newspaper. Marler isn't going to be speaking, unfortunately, but I heard he's going to be out there just to kind of hang out with people. When I was running these talks for the city, I had Marler come out and speak, but I'm no longer running the Roswell talks. So, but Roswell, I believe Marler will also be speaking at MUFON, and I'll be speaking there as well.
Oh, in Florida.
In August.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in August in Florida, he'll be speaking. I think Marler's great too.
Yeah, he definitely stands out. And it's interesting to just how some people are just very, very careful, and some people are not. And I'd consider him, someone that's very cautious in the work that they do.
I agree. And the reason I appreciate that is, anybody can speculate all day. And I don't think there's a problem with speculation. That's great. It's fun to sit around with friends and to speculate, or even to talk like this, like we do sometimes, and speculate. However, what I do does get frustrating to me is some people feel that their speculation is better than others, and that they can sit up there and speculate, and you have to subscribe to their speculation. So much so that they sell their speculation as if it's knowledge. And that's really frustrating and egotistical to me. I think we need to – I prefer the people like Marler or others that are sharing, research and information and respecting everyone for their speculation. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like to put out information, because I just think we need to be respectful of everybody's speculation, and that everybody has the opportunity and the right to. And I just don't like some of these people who they seem real oppressive with their speculation.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because it kind of is a good segue into something I wanted to discuss a little bit. And that is, I don't want to use the word cliquey, but there seems to be different camps in the UFO field, and they seem to shun one another or ignore one another. And I'm just going to, some people may not like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is,
all right.
And that is, we have someone like Doug Trumbull and Mark D'Antonio doing the UFO Talk 2 that are earnestly trying to create these units. You have Ray Stanford that was doing this way back in the 1970s with the state-of-the-art $2 million worth of equipment at the time, which was big bucks.
Wow.
It might have been $1 million, but it was over $1 million anyway. So you have his knowledge. You have, and these people are would love to help now. The UFO data. So UFO data. There's no collaboration between all of them. However, Ray has mentioned that he wanted to offer any advice that he could help with. Mark D'Antonio, I'm sure, along with Doug Trumbull, would like to help. And there just seems to be a disconnect. I see that in a couple of other aspects of this field where people want to stay in their camp. Maybe they don't trust other people, or they believe something bad about them, or whatever. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. There's territorialism that happened. I think a lot of the issues come with when people are trying to, whether it's pride or a want of fame or fiduciary, and that's what's kind of scary is when people make a living and they're trying to make money off of things, and those become their primary goals. Then it's unfortunately when those things get in the way. Otherwise, there are a lot of people just who also feel they want to go about things differently. And I don't know. I agree with you. It gets frustrating when different groups don't work together. I think that's what's fun about something like, I mean, I hate to always talk about myself or what we do, but I guess that's what I do every day in this field is try to concentrate on these sort of things. But the UFO Congress, for instance, is something where we try to not be cliquey. I mean, we are niche in a way. So, for instance, we don't have channelers. We don't often have experiencers because we opt to have people who research experiencers or experiencers maybe that have been part, like a Travis Walton, that have been part of a huge case with multiple witnesses and things like that. And so we're not trying to not include those people, but we're trying to, represent as much of the material or research or experiences as possible. Because, of course, like the researchers, let's say Yvonne Smith, we haven't announced that, but she'll be speaking at the next UFO Congress. She's spoken to a lot of experiences, so she can talk about it at a higher level. And we're going to have Kathleen Martin and some others who will be talking about this sort of thing. So, but at least at the Congress, that's the only kind of niche kind of we do. Otherwise, our goal is to try to bring people together that haven't met or talked or worked with each other before. And luckily that happens. And same with the radio show and everything. But sometimes people just don't like working with other people. They don't like their methods and things. In the case that you brought up, UFO data, and then there's UFOTOG, working separately. On the one hand, I know Mark and Doug have a specific vision and moved down the road towards their vision. Their specialty is in kind of manufacturing and especially around optics, because that's what they do. I mean, they're working in Hollywood and for commercials and stuff like that. Out of all those people, I'm most close with Mark D'Antonio, even though I've talked to a lot of the people in all the groups. But I talk to Mark more regularly, and I know he's reached out and hasn't got much response, and that is unfortunate. And it at least some sort of communication, I think, is always helpful. I think we have to be brave enough to say, even if we're not going to work with someone, why. For instance, when I was doing PR for MUFON, people would ask, why doesn't MUFON do that? Why doesn't MUFON do that? And I would have to say, that's not what MUFON is. MUFON, we barely have enough resources for what we do, which is true of Open Minds as well. And so we have to focus. And if we're going to do something halfway decently, we can't be everything for everyone. If you feel that needs to is an area that's not getting attention, then go for it. You can go ahead and go do that, and we'll support you and help you however you like. But we just don't have the resources to do that. And in fact, with Open Minds, I have to say that. And and it's one of the things out there. You kind of do for yourself and can't expect for others to do it. But at least when you're communicating, like I have no idea why the UFO data people don't seem to be wanting to work with the UFOTOG. When I asked them, they said, "Oh, yeah, we would like to talk to them." Well, talk to them then, and at least tell them why you want to remain separate, so we can all learn from that. I mean, it's about communicating.
Right. there are other, parts of the UFO field like that. But another thing I thought would be, we don't have to focus on that. But, I was watching recently on Netflix, I can't remember the series, there's some UFO series that just came out, and I started watching it the other day. And there's a lot of people from this is all filmed in the mid to late 1990s. And there's a lot of people that I just don't recognize their name, because I wasn't in it back then. So there's what seems to happen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of people get burned out for some reason or another. I tried to contact someone that did some good work, and I can't remember his name. And he says, I have nothing to do with the UFO field from now on. So that does happen. There's people that get discontent with situations. And you've been at this a long time. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah, definitely have seen it. In fact, that's what Antonio is in one of those modes. He's just done and he has been for a couple of years. And I can understand it. I mean, you hear from a lot of people who face that. And, especially I think it's even harder in today's world than it was before, because now we have this instant feedback. And I have to try to remind myself not to look at social media too often, because there are just a lot of people who are really mean out there. Mm-hmm. And, when all you're trying to do is put together some information and share it, there's so much kill the messenger. In fact, I think some of these people, if they could reach through their computer and literally kill you, they would. And so when you trying to be positive and send out information for positive reasons, and you see so much hate coming back at you, mm-hmm. that's really, really hard to deal with. And I think anybody that puts themselves out there in the media or to share information, as a recipient of that sort of thing, and a lot of people aren't expecting it. They don't like it. They don't want it. And so, I can understand how it would be difficult for some people, and it is really difficult for some people. It's also, even with peers, even when they face what may be constructive criticism, or at least presented in that way, some people aren't very good at handling that because they're not used to it. They don't have that in their everyday life. And it's another thing I think we all have to kind of be open to, or try to, as researchers, try to take. One of the things I do, for instance, I think some of the most harshest criticism, not necessarily all negative in a negative way, comes in a UFO group called UFO Updates. There's a lot of people in there. There's some people who are just a bit rude, certainly. But when I have a piece that I've done research on, or a lot of my pieces I like to put in UFO Updates, because then they can go at it and criticize it, and at least I can say, oh, you know what, they have a legitimate criticism. I need to address that so I can learn and improve and become better myself. But if it's just petty kind of stuff, then I can disregard that. But at least you do have to test yourself in some ways. But when you just otherwise, when, for instance, looking at this Gary McKinnon story, all I did was write about what Gary McKinnon said. I'm not judging Gary McKinnon for being drunk and stoned. If he wanted to be drunk and stoned, so be it. I mean, he had issues going on in his life, and I'm not judging him. I'm just trying to get to the root of the story and the information and put that out there. But if you read the comments in that story, people were really mean. Just saying that I'm trying to be full of disinformation and I'm trying to drag him down. And if they read, these are direct quotes from him. If anybody's disparaging him, it's him disparaging him, not me. So, and that can be really tough. I talk to people on a regular basis. And there are a lot, for instance, of MUFON people who, as they get to post more stuff online, they get met with this negativity, and they're just done. And that's it. There are people getting involved with this field, trying to put themselves out there, and then just walking away on a regular basis. It happens a lot because instead of getting, a lot of positive feedback, it's just the positive people I think are quieter. What I like to see is an increase in hits, an increase in listens to the show. That keeps me inspired, so I know that the people that appreciate this are out there. But, some people just feel like, this is not worth it. It's not worth all of this frustration and this anger that's had faced your direction because you don't agree with what someone, believes. So, it can be difficult. So I understand it, and it is there. It happens more often than not. Than over a period of years that people got to walk away at least for a little while. And some people get really, and you can see this evolution. Some people get mean, and then some people just decide to disregard what anybody has to say and kind of go off in their own la la land and not listen to any feedback and just kind of do their own thing. And it's a result of this, how people deal with that sort of thing. So, and
some of it I think has to do, some of it I think has to do with the fact that some that I've talked to that have been at it for a long time just say, I'm no closer to any type of answer than I was 35 years ago.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so they get frustrated in that way.
Yeah. Well, how about you? I mean, I'm curious. You face that negativity, and and I would imagine you would feel that you haven't necessarily learned a whole lot, or at least not the roots of the mystery, since you've been doing this. I feel that way. What keeps you motivated?
I still really like talking to fascinating people that have. Ideas on the subject. Because when you start talking to someone, you never know what's going to be revealed. So it's always fascinating. Like last week, Ron Regira, I had no idea what he was going to be like, and he was wonderful. I thought he was really good. So I guess what keeps me going is I feel like actually I feel like my life is better being involved in this fascinating topic. It's interesting. And it's also very interesting when people find out about it out in, my world, whether it's my real job in antiques and fine arts and things like that, that actually have a story. I love hearing stories. From people that I'm just out in the field and people that normally would never share a story with anyone. And when they find out that I'm doing this, and they'll share it with me, and I think that's really, that's pretty nice. Nice to have.
What about negativity that is focused in your direction? How do you deal with it?
I heard a really good quote once, and I try to exercise that now because, yes, I do get there is a lot of negativity that comes in emails and comments that I won't allow posted on under shows and things like that. And that is, if you take every negative comment with the same grain of salt that you take a compliment with, then you'll be grounded. In other words, don't let a negative comment affect you any more than a positive comment should affect you. Just be happy with what you're doing, or don't do it. And so I guess if I can keep that philosophy, then the negative comments aren't going to. I had someone recently got an email from someone that I'm not even going to use any of the language they wrote in the email, but basically saying that the show sucked and I was terrible and all that, and go to hell type of thing, but with harsh words. And I just said, I just wrote back, I'm sorry, you must be having some type of trouble, and I really am sorry. And it's true, but there are people that, this shield of the internet or whatever it is, so there's no eye-to-eye contact, that people can say anything they choose, and that happens. You see it especially on, like you said, social media and YouTube and places like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, you do seem to handle it well. I haven't heard you say, man, I can't take this.
Yeah. I'd say in the beginning when I would get that, I was much more susceptible to worrying about it. But now it's everybody has their opinions, and that's fine.
Yeah. And, one thing that I will not do is compromise my integrity. And I'm looking for answers and truth, and sometimes I know when it's like, oh man, I find out, or Mark D'Antonio does this to me all the time, or some great picture or some great video that I thought, this is never going to be debunked, this is amazing, this is great, and then something's figured out that actually that was a paper airplane thrown by little Joey past the window, and Aunt Ruth took a picture at that time. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for it, but one thing I will not do is just let that go and let people, go on with it, believe that without the information about, little Joey fessing up that he was tricking Aunt Ruth, because that's what we're here for, is to get out information. That's what I'm here for, is to get out information about this topic, and not everybody appreciates that.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about your day. You do this as a full-time job, and I think you're probably one of the very few in the entire world that actually does this for a full-time job. Am I right?
I think so. Yeah, I think. I would imagine there's maybe only a handful, if that.
Yeah. So you come in the morning. Let's say a typical day. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a total interview of you, but you come in. You start searching for something new, or do people send you things?
A little bit of both. So on a typical day, what I do is I'll come in, and the very first thing that I like to do is look for the headlines. And that actually is a lot of work. But I think it's a great service. It's something that I've been doing for a long time. And I started doing it because there was a kind of a news clipping thing that John Schuessler used to do. He was a director for MUFON, only the second director for MUFON, and he was the director when I joined MUFON. And he would send out emails, or in some cases at his meetings he would hand out news clippings, UFO stories in the headlines. And when the internet started getting big, I would take those pieces of information with his blessing, working with him. He is a mentor of mine, and I would get those online. At first I got them like on a Google, was it a Google? I forgot, Yahoo group or something like that. I think it was Yahoo Groups. That was the big thing. And I called it and then I started doing, putting them in emails and then online and these different things. And so, and then when I started my podcast and my website, UFO Think Tank, I started doing that, these headlines. And I think it's really important, and it's really cool because it demonstrates that there are UFO stories in the mainstream out there, that there is a discussion about UFOs all over the world. And so I love sharing those, and it seems pretty popular. It seems to be a service that people really like. And so my first thing is to look for stories, and look for good stories and pertinent stories, credible stories. It's unfortunate that right now we're in the era of the UK tabloids is what I call it in ufology, where they're kind of taking a lead on the direction that mainstream media covers the topic. And as a typical tabloid, as what you think of the Inquirer or something, they're full of dubious or just completely false information or making a big deal out of hoaxes. Often they steal my stories. I mean, just today, John Austin, this name that lives in infamy amongst people who follow this stuff online, took one of my stories and took my name out of it, took my quotes that I got from interviewing this person and didn't reference me at all, and posted the story on the Daily Express in the UK. In some cases, I like it when it's promoting, something that I would like to promote, although I would like at least credit. I mean, I don't mind if anybody takes our stuff or at least references or whatever, as long as they give us credit. But they often these tabloids get and it's the Daily Star. We've talked about these Daily Express. They get the facts wrong and everything. So I don't, link to them at all because these days they have very little credible information, if any, that they cover. But otherwise, there's lots of news stories out there, lots of really interesting stuff. So that's the first thing I do is the headlines. I focus heavily on that. And, if you go to openminds.tv, pretty much every day you're going to see a new set of UFO headlines there right in the center on the front page. So that's the first thing I do. And then I'm always looking for stories and following what other people are do. I do the website, so there's some administration of that and posting Roger Marsh's stories. I love to post other people's stories like Paul Stonehill's, and then I'll have to look for images, make sure I credit. One of the things that I do that you'll find on Open Minds is I give credit to everybody. I reference sources with a link. I give credit on every photo. And I give credit and link on any reference in any of our stories to make sure that if I'm referencing Kevin Randle, I'm linking to his website. If I'm referencing a couple of things he said that were on two different blogs, and I'm going to link to both blogs. David Rudiak in this story, I have at least 2 or 3 links to his website. So making sure that people know where to get more information and that the people who deserve the credit get it, because if we're highlighting someone's work, that's the whole point, is highlighting that look at this cool, great research that this person has done. Even if it's something I'm dubious of, it's like, still, this person took the effort to do this. What do you think? Who cares what I think? What do you think about what this person has done? And so that takes a lot of time and effort. I mean, it's easier to do what John Austin did and to just go out there and grab a story, take all the references out of it just so you can say this person said this and this did this. It's easy. You could write stories just like these tabloids do all day, every day, if you don't have to reference anything. But that's not what we do.
Now, how do you find something like that? Do you just look for stories and all of a sudden you pops up and you see a story that, wow, hey, that's my story? Is that what happens?
With that one, yeah, usually, for instance, that is when I do my searches to look for mainstream media stories, I often run across our stories or people referencing our stories. For instance, one of the news sources that I don't put in our headlines because I don't feel it's mainstream enough is the Inquisitor. But I should say, because there's the Inquisitor and the Examiner, pretty much anybody can go on and sign on to be a writer. So those are kind of bloggy. They're not really, mainstream news. But I got to give credit because there's a gentleman, I can't remember his name right now, who writes a lot of UFO stories in the Inquisitor, but he does a great job referencing people. So, as long as you reference, that's cool. So I'll usually find it in my regular search, and I've got these different ways that I search for stuff, multiple different ways, and that's how I'll run across them. And I'm pretty good. It's rare that there's a story on UFOs or even extraterrestrial life that somebody posts that I didn't see. But it does happen because people like Billy Cox don't use those keywords so it's harder to find their stories. I love Billy Cox. He writes for the Sarasota Herald Tribune,
right.
But he never uses the term UFOs in his headlines, and so it can be hard to find that he's writing about UFOs.
Yeah, I've tried to get him on the show. Have you ever interviewed him?
No, he doesn't like doing interviews. I've also
why.
tried to get him on, and he doesn't like to do interviews, unfortunately, because I think you would have some fascinating things to say. But I highly recommend him. And when I find a story of his, I definitely do link to it, because he is in the Sarasota Herald Tribune, so he is a staff writer and a journalist. So that's what I do, and then I find all these stories and I post them, and then also I try to write my own stories, but my stories take a lot of research, so and I hope that people, when they look at my Roswell story, for instance, I think it's pretty concise, but gives you the latest and the greatest on what's going on with that Ramey memo, so you understand it and you see what people think that memo says currently. And that takes some time to research and make sure you give the credit and everything. So I want to write about Paul Dean and some of his work. I want to write about some other great work that's out there. But there's also the Congress coming up, and inviting speakers, making sure the website's updated, and creating documents and all the paperwork, speaker contracts, vendor contracts, and figuring out the space and communicating all of these different things with the conference is always a lot of work. And then, every Monday, Michael, the amazing video guy that we have with Open Minds, I write a script, and then Michael and I go over the script for the UFO report, and then we film that, and then we work together on posting that, and then I create these emails, because we send out emails every other week to let people know what's going on with Open Minds. So I'm always super, super busy, and I don't get back on emails that often. I don't get back on phone calls that often. I rarely even answer the phone. I let it go to the voicemail and then get back with people. And so correspondence-wise, honestly, it can take me some time. In fact, I don't know if I should even say it, but the secret is the quickest way to get to me is probably via Facebook. But or pretend you're Martin, because I take Martin's emails very seriously. They're
for some reason you do. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you get a lot of email. I do as well, and I welcome email. I am way behind on it right now, and I just have to give the message out there that if you're going to write me an email, I have ADD. I'm sure I do. I'm just kind of probably joking a little bit, but I have a hard time reading. When I open an email and I see it's like 4 pages long, I don't get through it. So if you want to email me and get your point across within a paragraph or two, then I'll probably be able to respond. Speaking of that, we had some questions. This one's a little unusual, and if you don't mind, I'll throw it at you. And what, if anything, is going on in the Antarctic today? Why is the area in the immediate vicinity of the South Pole whited out on Google Earth and other imagery? What happened with Admiral Byrd, an unusually large immediate post-war contingency when they journeyed there? Do you know anything about that, or do you? I've heard people talk about some type of connection between UFOs and Antarctica, and I've never really looked into it. Have you?
How dare you ask me this question?
Oh, no.
Just kidding. No, actually, I've heard a couple interesting stories. Wendell Stevens, for instance, who I referenced earlier, that might have been while you were not able to hear us, but he says when he was in the Air Force, they witnessed a UFO landing, and he was in the Air Force, and they actually investigated it. Otherwise, Admiral Byrd, and here again, I apologize for anyone who is really married to this story, but from my research, it appears it's all bunk. So essentially, the fugal rod. So there's a story, a legend out there that Admiral Byrd, when he was out exploring, got into his plane and he flew and he saw this hole where he looked down and they could see into the earth, and they flew in there, and these UFOs with Nazi symbols or swastikas on the side escorted them in, and they talked to these aliens, and the aliens were of course upset with us, and they called their spaceships fugal rods, and that they were helping out Hitler at the time, and that's why Hitler created UFOs, and all of this wild and crazy stuff that was all in this alleged secret journal of Admiral Byrd. It turned out that was a complete hoax. It was actually a hoax perpetrated by someone who allegedly was related to Admiral Byrd, but it was a complete hoax. So really, if you look into Admiral Byrd, there are a couple photos out there from his expeditions that people think are mysterious. And who knows, these could be genuine UFO photos. They're so old, it's difficult to tell. I know of at least one person. I don't even think he has a website or anything. A friend of mine, Joe Fex, had these pictures that showed some interesting things in the sky that was taken during the expedition. But other than that, I apologize. I don't really put any stock into those stories, and I say that after having done some thorough research into those stories. So other than that, I don't have any, there's stories about the Nazis going up there and creating bases and stuff like this, but none of this has ever panned out in investigation. So, yeah, that's all.
Yeah, well, that is really interesting. I never heard the whole story about that. Yeah, that's pretty wild. When it comes to myths, another one is, and I've even seen this in documentaries, is Alexander the Great, had a UFO encounter. When that's really looked into and traced back, it only goes back to a 1952, I think it is, novel, and that's as far back as it goes. It was in some novel that he did, and then later it was taken as fact. So, I mean, if someone doesn't research and they just, broadcast something like this, then, eventually people are going to believe it's true.
Yeah, and that happens so often. I mean, with the Gary McKinnon stuff like we were talking about earlier, certainly, I mean, I love to be corrected. If you find references of something that I was not aware of, I love that, and I will very quickly add that to my stories and give credit. But, I try to be as thorough as possible when I'm putting these things together. And, for instance, when I go to look at a story like Admiral Byrd, okay, let's write this up. Let's figure this out. If I don't find anything credible, then there's nothing to do there. So it often turns out that these are legends that are really dubious. So what can you do?
Right. So we have about, about 12 minutes left. And one of the things, I was talking earlier about how back in the 1990s there were so many people that had changed and dropped out of the field. And I do want to touch on what has happened since the beginning, since, let's say, 1947, when you got into the contactee movement and all that. But there's kind of a controversial subject to someone who's a longtime listener of both of our shows, and I met him out in Phoenix, and he's a big fan of both of our shows, and he asked this question, and would we be willing to comment on Stan Romanak's apology? I didn't get a chance to look at some YouTube video he sent me, and that's, let's see, he explains why he discredited himself, having observed high strangeness. Do you know anything about that, and would you want to comment on it?
I do. And I mean, I don't comment on this stuff much, and it's out of respect for the family. I was very close with Romanek and his family, and for instance, his wife and his stepchildren, her children, I just love to death. They're wonderful people, and all of their friends. But I am very, very disappointed in Stan. I think he perpetrated a hoax on my radio show. He perpetrated a hoax, and that was years before this one that this person's referring to. But he did this interview where he threw a pen in the air, pretending like the aliens made it fly across the screen, and was busted for it because you could see him flicking it. Eventually he apologized, but it was a real convoluted sort of reason, like the government made him do it or something like that.
No, I thought that was on the guy in Australia's video.
Yeah. But Romanek did a thing where he apologized for it, and that's what this listener is referring to.
I see.
And I think it's unfortunate because there was some. I experienced some strange things. I at least saw a UFO sighting with him. Who knows if he had anything to do with that? It could have been just a coincidence because I used to spend lots of time with his family that I saw this thing. His family, his sister, for instance, and his best friend Mark. I used to spend a lot of time with them. They're friends of mine, and we used to do sky watching just like I do out here with the MUFON out here, and so I had seen things. I think that there are a lot of things with his case that I think maybe, just maybe, might be legitimately odd and strange. There are things that happen I couldn't explain, and if he faked all of what's happened to him and the things that I've seen, then he is, more capable than I have given him credit for. So I am disappointed in him, and because like I said, integrity is a big deal to me. And when you do something like what he did with the catching of the flicking and other things I've witnessed, then your case holds no more credibility. So if there was even something that really seriously paranormal happened, then there's nothing you can do with it. It's tainted and it's destroyed.
Yeah.
It's just like Billy Meyer. I think most of his stuff is all faked. Mm-hmm. It may be some of his early sightings are real. There's a really interesting sighting he had with like a politician in India, this lady who's very credible. And maybe he had some legitimate sightings, but now it's all tainted from all this other stuff, plagiarizing and all this other stuff he's gotten busted for. So, yeah. And you could go case by case on this sort of thing, but then what can you do with it? When it comes to credibility, if I'm focused on the mainstream like I am, and I'm trying to bring credibility to the field and try to demonstrate to the mainstream that, look, there are credible people, there's credible cases, this is something there are things worth taking seriously, those then have to fall off the wayside, and I can't waste my time with any of that stuff. I've got to keep focused on what's new and what's good out there. And so,
no, you're right, absolutely right. And I think what happens in a situation like that is, say, I have thought maybe personally that, Billy Meyer at one time did have something happen, but you're right. I mean, everything is purely very easily. It's easy to tell. There's a lot of bogus stuff going on there. Also, Nancy Talbot says she spent, I think, a week and a half at Stan Romanek's house years ago, and she said things were actually happening. She saw things happen with her own eyes in that house. An orb went across the room and all kinds of weird stuff. But, I think what happens is maybe things happen with these people, and like they obviously do with Romanek, but he gets so into it and gets attention from it, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, and perhaps has to instigate more. It's not enough.
Well, Ben Hansen does a talk on this that is just brilliant. If you haven't seen it, he's done it at the Congress, and you can go watch it. In fact, we have a video portal where you can go watch all of the Congress videos, and I'm happy to say to Michael, especially who I mentioned earlier, our video guy. I mean, our videos of our UFO lectures at our conference, you won't get the quality anywhere else. They're extremely high quality, high definition, good audio. You can see these lectures presented in a way you'll not see anywhere else. But Ben does a great talk that you can get at our video portal. You'll see a link to it on our site. And about this, and he came up with a term. He called it legendizing, where people legendize, where they have something paranormal happen to them, and they become super popular. And so in order to keep themselves in the limelight, they begin to hoax and fake stuff. And
wow.
And I know for a fact, talking to him personally, he doesn't say it, but Romanek's one of the people he has in mind when he was coming up with this idea. But Billy Meyer is who he typically references when he talks about legendizing. And it's really fascinating. It's an incredible idea that's very similar to what you were just talking about. And I think that you're both onto something there.
Yeah. I think, wow, I'll have to check that out, definitely. Yeah, another good one from Ben, I guess. So Phil is a longtime supporter of the show and asks this question: What can we say about Peter Davenport's idea of passive radar?
It's an interesting idea. The problem is, I mean, there's a lot of great ideas out there, and and this is one of them. But this is an idea, and it comes back to what you were talking about with UFOTOG and UFO data. The other flip side to this is that these are great ideas, but they take so much effort and money that they never come to fruition. I mean, I love Mark and Doug Trumbull to death. Doug Trumbull's a huge legend to me, but they've been working on this project and talking about it for years, many, many years, and nothing come of it yet. Peter Davenport's been talking about his project even longer than that one. It's a great idea, but so it's there's so many good ideas out there, but just the research in this field lacks is resources in manpower and or human power, I should say, because there's a lot of very talented and capable women in this field, and money, and we just don't have those things to make them happen. But yeah, I think it's a great idea. He's essentially talking about tapping into other radar to be able to monitor all of the skies for UFOs, and it's a great idea.
Yeah. Now here's a couple of follow-ups I want to just ask if you know anything about, and that is, I believe on your show, I help you out with the news, also on your show.
That's true.
And that comes out every Monday afternoon, almost every Monday afternoon. You had talked about a woman picking up some silvery substance after a UFO sighting, and I just wondered, has that advanced? Has anyone looked into what that was?
Oh, you know what? I would have to ask Roger for a follow-up on that one.
Okay.
So, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. The next one is, have we heard anything from our guys over there at the CubeSat? Dave, Cody, and all that.
CubeSat. Well, yeah, we hear a lot from them. Dave, one of the Daves, because there's these two Daves. Dave Schock is in our Open Mind UFO news group. That's our Facebook page where we don't allow trollers. We only allow civil discussion in there, and people who even disagree with each other, as long as you talk civilly with each other. So go to the Open Mind UFO News Facebook group. It's a closed group, but just ask to join and we'll let you. Being closed just allows us to boot you if you start to get mean. But yeah, Dave Schock's in there a lot. They're still working. They're still raising money, I guess, which is kind of weird to me because they've already had a successful Indiegogo campaign. So they're in the process of getting it done, but it's going to take some time. However, it is going to happen because they get their funding, and now they're just trying to get funding to add more cool stuff onto it. So that's going to be a lot of fun and interesting when it happens. And for people who don't know, you can look up CubeSats, and actually there have been some launched even by students lately, where it's a small cube, and NASA or actually these other space companies will allow you to put whatever you want on that cube. Then they launch it and they let it go into space. And what these guys are going to do is put a camera and some communication so that this camera will send pictures back to the planet so they can kind of monitor space for UFOs. But they want to put other telemetry on there, sort of like the UFO-TOG or the UFO data, where they can monitor electromagnetic forces and other things. So that's what they're looking to do.
Well, guess what? We're out of time. Boy, that went fast.
Out of time.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Alejandro. And we'll be catching you next week for the news here.
All right. Awesome. Talk to you next week, brother.
All right. And so thank you, everyone, for listening. And I have a guest, but I don't have a solid confirmation for next week, so I don't want to announce it. So anyway, thanks for listening. And thank you, Alejandro, for being the guest and the news guy both this week. I want to also thank Peggy Shunning for manning the Facebook page, or womaning the Facebook page, I should say. Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music. And so that's it. And we're off the air. We'll talk to you next week right here on Podcast UFO.